This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Hi.
What do you guys want to talk about?
Thanks, guys. Back to you.
All right. So, I had some temporary audio issues at the beginning there. I did a test. Things should be good now. Still in the process of working through that new mic purchase. I know it's been 3 years of me saying that, right? Can we go for 4? You know it. I am starting to get a little frustrated with this current mic I'm using. It's not even the mic that's the problem, it's the app that's so stupid. So, story time. I don't know if anybody's going to find this remotely interesting. If not, you can just skip ahead to the Crockett review in the timeline. So, what I typically do is I take the audio recordings and splice them up into 3 sections. I'll do the Crockett reviews, the Midsouth reviews, and then the World Class reviews. Or if it's the Monday show, it'll be a Raw review and whatever pay-per-view we happen to be covering that weekend. So I gather all that up. I send everything to the Google Drive. Then I go through the process of downloading the audio files so I can convert them over to iMovie. Yes, I still use iMovie in 2024. You can all laugh. But just within the last week, this app is now giving me problems with sending all my stuff over to my Google Drive. It just keeps giving me this error message like, so-and-so is trying to access your drive and we don't have permission to access these files, or something ridiculous like that. I've never seen this message before. I've been using the same system for the last 3 years. I tried uninstalling and reinstalling it. I'm looking around and like, is there an update or something I didn't know about? I can't figure it out. So I had to basically go through like 3 extra steps of sending everything to my iCloud, which I hate because I can never find anything on that stupid thing. So after wasting like 15 minutes trying to find the audio files that I sent over, and then I can email the attachments to myself, and God, I just waste so much time. If only I had the money to hire somebody to help me out with the production side of things. That way I could just focus on talking about wrestling and not have to worry about anything else. I never proclaimed to be an audio tech or an editor. Not my forte. Wasn't that fun? Weren't you guys glad to hear me rant? No, we got plenty more ranting to get into today. So make sure y'all subscribe, comment, and like if you have not already. This is the Five Starr Wrestling Report, the wrestling podcast nobody knows but everybody needs. Here to serve the wrestling community on Mondays and Fridays for wonderful classic coverage. And it is Friday, so we do have the territory coverage to get underway. It's always a banger of a time, especially once I get going with these NWA reviews. I need to get out of the habit of calling them Crockett reviews, though, because we are basically in a post-Crockett era. It might not seem that way based on the television shows, but we have officially entered the Turner TBS era. It's still a little bit of a culture shock. And we have had a string of pretty good shows lately. I know I immediately jinx it as soon as I bring it up. That's Murphy's Law. Actually, no, that's something different. No, Murphy's Law is the notion that anything that can go wrong will go wrong. So in other words, anytime Tony Khan comes up with a booking idea and puts it to paper, well, in any case, we still got a solid 4 weeks until this Starrcade pay-per-view. In the interim, there will be at least one Clash of Champions to review, which I promise I won't miss this time. I actually went ahead and looked at the card for that show, just out of curiosity, because they normally don't do a great job promoting those matches on the Superstation. I mean, aside from the main event with Flair and Wyndham going up against the Midnight Express, God, the rest of this card looks lame as fuck. I mean, there's a big part of me that's dreading having to sit through 9 minutes of Ivan Koloff versus Paul Jones. I don't know how I'm going to stomach that one. That sounds brutal. I mean, I'm looking at the wiki right now. I have no idea how any of this card is supposed to generate excitement for Starrcade at the end of the month. You know, but as we've been discussing with a lot of these October and November TBS shows, I'm still not particularly sold that they even knew what the hell that finalized Starrcade card was going to be by this point. I mean, there's been so much shuffling around with things that they previously started with other guys and went in completely different directions, or things that they kept teasing on television at one point but never actually followed through with. Weird random alliances with baby faces and heels that made absolutely no sense contextually. I mean, the only thing that's really saving this company at the moment is the Midnights versus Midnights feud. Maybe seconded by the splitting of Rick Steiner from the Varsity Club. Beyond those two things, this pay-per-view hype is colder than a witch's tit. So we open things up with Bam Bam Bigelow and Trent Knight. It's amazing. Every time I see Trent Knight, he looks more and more like a low-rent bootleg Magnum TA. And at the same time I'm poking fun at people's looks, I'm watching Oliver Humperdinck from the back. He looked like a part-time divorced hairstylist in oversized clothing. There's literally nothing to say about this match. Bam Bam had a group of very passionate fans in the front row cheering him on. Looked like 5 teenagers who were elated to attend their first wrestling show. I mean, they're reacting to Bam Bam here like he just pinned Flair for the world title at Starrcade. He beat Trent fucking Knight. But boy, howdy, they were excited. Those particular 5 people. The rest of the studio was eerily quiet. Bam Bam went over with a gourd buster. And then we went to ringside where Humperdinck was putting over Bam Bam and basically insinuating that he won't settle for anything less than Bam Bam becoming World Heavyweight Champion. Yet in the same breath, also suggesting Bam Bam would be okay with winning the United States Heavyweight title. So he is willing to settle then. And then they analyzed Bam Bam's head tattoos. He said that Bam Bam got his first head tattoo when he was in the 9th grade. Talking about how he didn't have to join the Navy to show how tough and ruthless he was. He went straight to the tattoo stylist and said, "I want a head full of flames." And apparently nobody questioned him. Despite the fact that I think you still have to be 18 years of age to legally obtain a tattoo. But then again, who the fuck is going to question Bam Bam Bigelow? So then we had the Fantastics versus Joe Cruz and Mike Jackson. Can we just name Mike Jackson the most underappreciated pro wrestler of the 80s? God, this guy was so great. He could work with just about anybody. It always makes me angry when he evidently gets paired with a job guy who can't wrestle his way out of a wet paper bag. Like, you get Jackson in there running wild and at least looking competent in the ring with the bigger stars. Then he tags out to a guy with 2 left feet. And the match immediately dies. I guess it saves Jackson from having to eat the pinfall, but at this rate, he might be better off just trying to wrestle the whole thing by himself. The matches would be 10 times better. I did like the one spot here where Cruz kneed Fulton in the back of the apron during a shoot-off. And then Jackson turns around and sees Cruz beating up Fulton in the ring. Not only did Jackson just walk back to his corner, even Teddy Long didn't give a shit there was no tag. He was probably like, well, the Fantastics are going to make their comeback anyway. There's no way Joe fucking Cruz is staying on offense for more than 30 seconds. So the Fantastics made their comeback, beat up Cruz for a little bit. They hit a double slingshot suplex followed by a running splash from Fulton for the 3. And then we came back for a fired up Midnight Express interview. Now, you remember last week, Jim Cornette cut the promo of the year when he came out to the studio and tore into Paul Lee in the original Midnights. In fact, it was such a great promo, I went ahead and played the full audio clip just to prove it. And I'll say, if last week's promo was a 10, I'd say this was a solid 8.5. Not the dynamite explosive rant we heard from Cornette last week, but I mean, pretty damn close in terms of showing passion and selling the importance of the heated grudge. You know, you once again have Cornette bringing out the bloody suit. He's ripping into Dennis Condrey, saying that Bobby Eaton's been getting pestered at the airport by fans for screwing over Dennis when it came to the breakup of the Midnights last year. Cornette is here to set the record straight. The reality is Dennis got complacent. And rather him letting guys like Bobby and Jim help him out and keep the steam of the original Midnight Express alive, instead Dennis took his ball and left. And when they brought in Stan Lane to replace Dennis, the reality quickly set in that Dennis was never the partner that Stan was. Now, Randy Rose sure as hell wasn't the athlete or in-ring technician that beautiful Bobby is. And all Paul Heyman represents is a cheap imitation of the original Jim Cornette. Cornette wouldn't even insinuate Paul's a wimp, because that's a disservice to wimps. Jim Cornette has been referred to as such before, but Paul Lee is a step below that. He's a worm. A slimy, no-good worm. And they've got their sights set on not only ridding Paul Lee and the knockoff brand version of the Midnight Express, but to also solidify that Bobby and Stan are the best incarnation of the Midnight Express. And when all is said and done, Cornette's going to take that bloody suit jacket and run it through every orifice of Paulie's body. Keeping it moderately PG for the TV audience. And you know, I will say this briefly before we move on. You've had fans over the years talk about JC cutting promos on Dennis around this time. You know, asking how much of the promo material was a work versus him expressing his true, genuine feelings about the way everything went down last year. You know, whether or not he still held a grudge over what Dennis did in '87. I don't know how much of that is accurate or not. I guess two things can be true at once. It is possible Cornette still had a bit of a chip on his shoulder. I still think this is mostly him working the crowd. I mean, he knew what Dennis was going through personally at the time. To this day, they're still friends. So if they did ever have issues following that departure, they had to have hashed it out since. I can see where people are coming from, though. It's not like you had the internet to confirm the real-life personal beef between Dennis Condrey, Bobby Eaton, and Jim Cornette. Not that they would have answered to the dirt sheets anyway. But hey, if you're into conspiracy theories, it's a good one to have. Then we had Eddie Gilbert and Dave Isley. We seem to develop a pattern with Eddie Gilbert squashes. This has happened in like 4 of the last 5 squashes he's had. He lets the job guy get in a few dirty shots on him. He'll warn him about it because, I mean, all Eddie's trying to do is wrestle a clean match. And then after it becomes apparent that the job guys don't want to fight cleanly, Eddie just starts beating the shit out of him. And the crowd does seem to take to it pretty well. When Eddie got a handful of Dave Isley on the apron and gave him a closed fist to the jaw, people went nuts for that. Because Isley got his comeuppance for trying to cheap shot Gilbert and be a dick. Yeah, I'll say this, man. I wasn't the biggest Eddie Gilbert fan growing up. I always thought he was a good talent, but as a kid, he just never really resonated with me all that much. Looking back at his Crockett run here, though, it's been pretty fun to watch. He definitely looks like he's having a good time. The people like him. I think the issue for Eddie, kind of like for a lot of those UWF guys they brought in last year after Bill Watts sold to Crockett, they just never really found a place for him on the card. You know, he was there as Terry Taylor's side piece for a while. He'd work occasional matches on television, but didn't really seem to have a whole lot going on creatively. Then he came back and teased a feud with the Varsity Club that never got off the ground. Him teaming with Jimmy Garvin, which also supposedly has been dropped with no explanation. And now he's forming a tag team with Ron Simmons. He's now a super pro American patriot from out of nowhere. And he just kind of fell into that trap of a guy that, unfortunately, I don't think he ever really found his true footing in WCW. I mean, he gets involved with some stuff in '89 with Flair and Wyndham. I don't know how true that story is about the booking committee considering making Gilbert a member of the Horsemen. I think that was all just hearsay. And or Eddie Gilbert spreading rumors, which he was prone to do. And he obviously had the falling out with Flair in 1990 when they were both on the booking committee and whatever drama happened there. I still don't know all the details. But it's just sad because The guy was obviously very passionate about the business. You could tell he wanted to become a bigger player. And then sometime by early 90, he basically leaves the promotion under pretty rough conditions. He goes back to Memphis for a while, and that was what it was. And then later on in 93, there was the Northeastern run where he becomes part of the booking team with Paul Heyman. And then once Gilbert gave up the position full-time there, we all know what that turns into. You know, Paul takes it and rebrands it into ECW. And then, you know, he kind of freelances for a couple years, and by 95, he's dead. What is it, a heart attack at the age of 32, 31? Really fucking young. It's just so tragic when you look back at this period, man. And you see all these guys that are just no longer with us. And so many of their deaths came unexpectedly and way too soon. You know what wasn't sad, though? Was watching Sting and Lex Luger beat up Trent Knight and Dave Isley in a tag. Now, obviously, this is a taped show, separate from the studio program. I mean, we literally just saw Trent Knight and Dave Isley work squashes this week. It was oddly convenient to see those same two guys served up to Sting and Luger. Dusty must have really had it out for those two. Now, it is important to note, this is Sting's first match back since the Road Warriors heel turn in that six-man tag. Sting's been off television selling the injury. So he got a massive ovation when he came out here. You get that awesome visual at the end with Sting submitting Knight and the Scorpion. Meanwhile, Luger powers up Isley into the rack. And those two are a well-oiled machine. And it all goes back to that conversation of how in the fuck did they decide to have Luger wrestle Flair for the world title at Starrcade instead? When you can tell the people were clamoring to see Hawk and Animal go up against Luger and Sting. And here's the crazy part. They don't even give us that match at the Clash. Instead, we're getting Dusty versus Animal in a 3-minute angle that leads to a DQ finish. I'll talk more about that later in the show. I don't even know if Sting and Luger are booked on that card. Hold on, let me check, because now I'm curious. No, they're not. God, dude. What the hell was going on during this period? Scatterbrain booking all over the map. And this is even during the heart of the Jim Herd era, where things get really bad. This is still when Dusty was around calling the shots. I'm telling you, man, you could tell he was so burnt out. I know the stories, Dusty gets fired from WCW in '89 because of the spike angle with the Road Warriors. The more I watch of this clusterfuck booking at the end of '88, I think Dusty may have given Crockett a notice. Or it was a collective agreement that Dusty leaves after the spike angle. So then we have Ron Simmons versus Terry Jones. I legitimately popped in the opening moments here when Terry tried to lull Simmons into a fake handshake. And right as he goes to sucker punch Simmons, he just completely no-sells it. Looks at Jones like he's about to murder this idiot. Jones sold it with the best moop face. Like, he knew he was about to die. He didn't even try to cover up or protect himself. He just let the ass beating ensue. So Ron predictably killed him. Beat him from pillar to post, as the old cliche goes. They also try to air another one of his Say No to Drug insets, which I try to block out because I'm so sick of hearing Ron Simmons preach to young kids about the evils of drugs. This is the dumbest gimmick he ever had. Worse than Farouk Assad in the fake gladiator helmet. Well, okay, maybe that's a bridge too far. Anyway, he gave Jones a shoulder block off the middle rope for the pin. Then we had a Barry Windham J.J. Dillon promo at the booth. My very first note reads as follows. Good Lord, what the fuck is Barry Windham wearing here? It looked like he was going for Men in Black, but then forgot to switch out the blue jeans for slacks. He had his hair completely slicked back, a black suit jacket, a white shirt, a skinny black tie. By the way, the skinny tie look was never in style, people. They've always looked tacky. He had orange shades, and then from the waist down, blue jeans. Well, then again, I guess it was better than that half salmon, half beige colored polo he wore that one week. That whole thing just screamed dad look. This screamed trying to find a new gimmick to match the heel persona, but still haven't entirely settled on the good attire yet. So I don't know what the hell he said here. Something about him not wanting to drop the US strap until he's ready to do other stings. I believe he meant to say things, but maybe he couldn't decipher whether he was trying to say thing or stuff. So he settled on stings. Or better yet, maybe he was talking about Sting directly. Which is now kind of weird hearing it in that perspective. He wants to do Sting? Well, that's a little kinky. Oh yeah, this promo sucked. That wasn't already abundantly clear. And then we came back for a Starrcade True Grit update. Not a card update per se, but just some general information about the pay-per-view. I believe it was the first time they've even made mention of the move date. What used to be a Thanksgiving annual tradition. Well, that's now been changed. The pay-per-view will now take place on December 26th. Also my birthday, but completely unrelated to the conversation. From Norfolk, Virginia. Good old Magnum TA's neck of the woods. And since Magnum will be one of the guest features on that card, getting an opportunity to host another one of his talk show segments, they went ahead and re-aired one of those old VTRs of him running on the beach with the sunset background, and I remember seeing this before. I think it was shortly after the auto accident in '86. It was supposed to be this uplifting video of him running on the beach in his bathing suit with the fucking seagulls in the background and whatever knockoff Baywatch gimmick they were going for. Probably would have picked a better VTR to air personally. It also didn't help that he was running around holding what appeared to be his mom's hand. Or some woman that was clearly 30 years older than him. This did not help his image. God bless Magnum, but this was about as close to him in a porn shot as you could get. By the way, I love how that's the selling point for Starrcade at the moment. Not whatever the main event is going to be, but buy the pay-per-view, folks. You'll get to hear Magnum TA talk to people. It's crazy. It's like I'm watching an episode of Raw or SmackDown in the present day, where the only things that matter are the talk segments. So then we have probably the biggest storyline mover for this week's show. And they aired a portion of this in the cold open. A match that had taken place between the Fantastics and Mike Rotunda and Dr. Death Steve Williams of the Varsity Club. And we only caught a glimpse of the closing seconds when Rick Steiner reached out and swiped Rotunda's leg out from under him. So JR gave us a little preview before they aired the full tape. Kevin Sullivan had pulled Steiner from that match and replaced him with Dr. Death because he's an asshole. And, well, we already know Steiner's pretty heated over the way he's been treated by Rotunda and Sullivan as of late. Last week we saw him have a major blow-up on television in front of both his teammates. So this is where things came to a head. Oh, by the way, I love this. Right before JR pitched to the video feed, you hear one of those goofball frat boys in the front row audibly yell, "We want to see the Road Warriors!" I was crying with laughter. These fucking numbskulls just actively trying to seek attention for the entire show this week. It was out of control. I'm surprised security didn't kick him out. Disturbing the peace. That's how obnoxious they all were. So as Jim noted here, this is about 17 or 18 minutes into the match. Both teams were visibly exhausted. Steiner had patiently waited on the floor, just buying his time. He already knew in the back of his head what he was planning here. If Sullivan wanted to screw him over and take him out of the match, Steiner was going to shove it right back in his face. The last straw, so to speak. And you get this spot where Rotunda goes to elevate Bobby Fulton into a suplex. Steiner picks Rotunda's ankle and trips him up. And that's where you see Steiner finally give Sullivan a stiff right hand to the jaw. There's Dr. Death and Rotunda immediately going out to the floor and whipping him like a dog. And it is a 3-on-1 beatdown as they're tearing into Rick's singlet and just going to town on him. I do have to say, too, that exchange with Dr. Death and Steiner, where they're just throwing haymakers back and forth and not caring how or where they landed. God, that was brutal. I guarantee somebody got potatoed in that exchange. Holy fuck, did it look great, though. And, of course, they strip poor Steiner down to his underwear, tearing the singlet into pieces. And at the same time, they're fending off Bobby and Tommy, so they can't come to Rick's aid here. Not that they had any reason to. And, well, after the heels leave, you see Rick get up and do his signature dog cry. All the fans go batshit and start doing the dog howl as well. It was a great camera shot as they pitched to break. I mean, easily the most electric face turn we've seen all year. Even more electric than the Midnight's face turn. Which I'd still argue wasn't even a real true face turn. I think the fans were just happy to see Cornette stand up to those invaders and put Paulie dangerously in his place. But this right here, I mean, this was the payoff to months and months and months and months of bullying and infighting. And I've even said numerous times, it's a very predictable outcome. Everyone can see where it's all leading. And while it did get fairly repetitive on television in terms of Rick Steiner putting up with all this BS week after week, the people were sure glad to see Steiner get his revenge in the end. I mean, how long had they been waiting for this moment? Late September, early October? It's been going on for a while. And what a way to capitalize on that turn, too. Doing it in front of a larger house like that. I mean, that got over way more than it would have if they did it on the studio program in front of 50 people. So, thumbs up to that. And there was more to this as we come back from break. We had Dr. Death and Mike Rotunda wrestling the Italian Stallion and Randy Hogan. Hogan spelled Hogen. Apparently Terry Bollea was threatening a lawsuit or something. Hey, brother, change that spelling of Hogan. I don't want to be associated with garbage like that, dude. This is actually where I determine, can't believe it took me this long to realize it. You know who Randy Hogan looked like? Your average creepy uncle. Think about it. Or as David Crockett would say, look at him. It made it all better by the fact that Randy took the brunt of the beating in this match. All Stallion had to do was just stand on the apron and not do much of anything. He was better off for it. Williams and Rotunda beat the holy high hell out of this dude. Pinned him with a stampede out of the corner. And then we got this epic interview afterwards with the Varsity Club at ringside. Just ripping into poor Steiner. They're proud, douchey bad guys that are so pleased with themselves. And Sullivan's joking how it's great to finally have a competent tag team where one of their guys actually follows directions and doesn't get lost at the airport. By far, Rotunda had the best series of lines here. He goes, Steiner, you're nothing but a moron. You're an idiot. Doc, tell him how stupid Rick Steiner is. It's just like, it is the single best version of campy heels being campy heels. You can clearly tell Rotunda had nothing constructive to say, but he just had to butt in with something to demean Steiner because he's a stooge. So the best he could come up with was just some surface level comment about Steiner being an idiot and a moron. Third grade fucking child's play dialogue. But it was perfect. And yeah, Dr. Death said some stuff here too. I kind of zoned it out. I think he accidentally called Steiner Steiner at one point. Yeah. And then we had Paulie Dangerously's hideously bad spray tan at the booth. Here to introduce the original Midnights for their next match. And they wrestled, Fuck, I forgot about this. Dude. I am beyond flabbergasted when it comes to the story of the Holiday Brothers in the NWA. Every week, it's like a fever dream. So last week, they introduced us to a third mysterious brother named Bill Holiday, apparently unrelated to Brett and or Brad Holiday, mostly given away by the skin pigment. So I remembered that subconsciously. Okay, so we have a third Holiday on this program named Bill. So this week I tune in. I'm 99.9% sure it was the exact same guy we saw wrestle last week as Bill. He has now changed his name to Phil Holiday. What the fuck is going on with these studio jobbers? This is like the most mind-boggling thing about going back to cover these classic shows. Okay, so it's one of two things. He's either changed his name from Bill to Phil, figuring nobody would notice, or the other option, there is a fourth fucking doppelganger Holiday brother on this show named Phil. Oh, Christ. Who's going to be next week? What other names rhyme with Bill and Phil? Will? Is there going to be a fucking Will Holiday showing up? Okay. So Bill/Phil Holiday and Brett Holiday. Yes, they were tag partners this week. Don't ask me why. So they were the ones that got served up to Dennis and Randy. A warm studio welcome to the OG Midnights. Here's the worst set of possible job guys you could work with. Have fun, boys. I legitimately think Dennis was having too much fun toying around with the Bill Holiday guy here. Just no-selling everything he did to him offensively. Whenever Bill Holiday was briefly on offense, which wasn't long. I mean, they tried a couple classic midnight spots here. Like Dennis running one of the jobbers into the interview podium and then cutting a promo afterwards. And we typically saw Bobby Eaton do stuff like that. It is interesting how Paulie isn't really following suit with Cornette's heel behaviors during matches, though. He's kind of just hanging out at ringside, working the phone gimmick, but he's not going over to the booth to try to cut promos or be a loudmouth. I mean, I would have expected him to be overtaking the interview station during all the OG Midnights matches. I don't know. Maybe he wasn't comfortable doing long-form improvised rants yet. I mean, the match is okay for what it was. Dennis and Randy are most definitely over his heels. Paulie was the perfect heater for both of them. So this definitely has a lot of traction headed into Starrcade at the end of the year. It's just everything that happens after the fact that leaves you wanting so much more. To his credit, Paul did a decently good heat promo afterwards. Basically his response to everything Cornette said earlier about Dennis. Like him trying to insinuate that Stan was always a better fit and a better partner for Bobby. But Paul talked here about how before Cornette broke into the business as a manager, he He was going around as a photographer, hoping that he'd be lucky enough to even sniff the ass crack of a wrestling ring one day. Not entirely his words, but close to it. He said that when Dennis finally got the opportunity to make a boatload of money after buying a ski resort in Colorado, Cornette couldn't handle that Dennis was making money hand over fist, in spite of the success of the Midnight Express. And while Corny's made a great career out of trash talking and running his yapper, he's never filled the real positions of a manager. Buying the boys their plane tickets, booking hotels, handling money. And when it comes to Dennis Condrey, he taught beautiful Bobby all there is to know. And Randy Rose was always a much better partner for Dennis. Okay, let's not go too far. Nothing against Randy, but we're starting to defy logic a little too much here. But yeah, other than the hideously bad spray tan, Paul looked great here. He made another joke about looking at the wrong camera, so you could tell that studio environment was still throwing him for a loop. Good heat segment, though. I don't know about Dennis's promo he tried to cut afterwards. That one fell a little flat in execution. He basically tried to get over how back when Dennis first met Jimmy in Louisville, Mama Cornette wanted Jim to manage two guys. And while he found two guys at the time, they weren't guys for Jim to manage. Yeah, I get it. He's suggesting that Jim was trying to have a threesome. Wah, wah, wah. So then we had the Russian assassins going over Mike Justice and Kurt Thompson. I shit you not, dude. The minute they rang the bell to start this fucking match, my nose started bleeding like a broken faucet. It was like Niagara Falls, dude. Just a gusher coming down my nostrils. TMI, I know. And there was a part of me that was like, yeah, maybe I should pause the show and go clean myself up before resuming. Then I thought about it a bit more. You know, if ever there was a match for me to skip out on, I don't think missing a Russian assassin squash was really going to hurt anything. So I had it on in the background as I was trying to hunt down a Kleenex. Came back in the room just in time to see the assassins getting checked by Teddy Long for a gimmick under their hat or their masks. So I assume Paul Jones fed them another gimmick. Somehow this is leading to Ivan Koloff and Paul Jones in a singles match at the Clash of Champions. You go figure that one out. Then we had a Hawk and Paul Ellering promo. Hawk attempted to make up a storyline reason for why Animal wasn't there this week. Something about stock investors fucking up assets and Animal being there to pick up the paycheck or something. I just kind of translated it as he missed a plane flight or something. Car trouble. So Hawk rambled on about Sting and Luger. Basically called Luger a liver-bellied low-life scum who spends more time admiring himself in a mirror than he does actually getting physical in a ring. No, Hawk. You're thinking of the Narcissist. That wasn't until 93. He also called Sting a coward for not showing up to television to confront the Road Warriors like he promised he would. And, well, albeit things are starting to go off the rails a little bit here with Hawk just talking about random shit, doing his best to self-censor himself for cable television. So eventually we get Jim Crockett showing up to make a special announcement, considering that the World Six-Man Tag titles are still currently held by the Road Warriors and Dusty. At the Clash of Champions 4, there will be a match between Dusty and Animal, where the winner gets to pick his partner or partners to hold the six-man trophy. So if Dusty wins, he gets to pick two partners. If Animal wins, the LOD get to pick one partner to represent them. And, well, we did cover that briefly when I mentioned a 30-minute match between Dusty and Animal that supposedly happens at this Clash event. One can only presume the six-man titles were very much superfluous. Kind of like how they've always been in the NWA. Unless it was something directly involving Dusty and the Road Warriors. Or the Russians. You can already see how Dusty was trying to wedge his way into this Road Warriors program. Right at the very point Luger and Sting were white hot as a tag team, Dusty stepped in there and said, "How about you give the American Dream a little taste of the Road Warriors action, Daddy?" Well, we saw how that ended. From there, we had Barry Windham and Jerry Price. Boring match. Barry went over with a claw hold. And then we had the best closing 3 minutes to the studio programming of all time. I'm not making any of this shit up. This all happened. You can go back and check for reference. First, we have Rick Steiner coming out with Spike, his alleged pet flea, or whatever in the fuck that jar was supposed to be. At first, I didn't even register it was supposed to be a fly. I thought Spike was the actual jar itself. Yeah, nobody ever talks about that gimmick. I can see why. Anyway, so he's just being Rick Steiner. Super friendly babyface. Saying hi to all the people at home and talking about how he's now got friends. So he's very much comfortable going after all three members of the Varsity Club, knowing that he's got the full backing support of the people. David Crockett's just the best special needs counselor you've ever seen. Showing his support for Rick Steiner here. Telling him he's his friend. Rick's going around shaking all the people's hands. You know, asking him if they'll be his friend individually. And right as David's trying to wrap it up, he tells Rick to come over and join him at the booth because they have a match ready to go in the ring. Again, man, David's like a paraprofessional here. He's just letting Rick do his thing. He's not harming anyone. He's not trying to overstep his boundaries or cause a disruption. Just grabbing Rick by the arm and saying, "Oh, that's great, Rick. Well, you know, we do have a match scheduled, so why don't we ease our way over to the podium and let these two gentlemen have their match?" And of course, in the ring, it's fucking Abdullah versus Eddie Sweat. I laughed so hard. It would have made it 10 times better if David was like, "Yeah, Rick, we do have this giant animal about to kill this pudgy, timid job guy before we go off air. What do you say we let this onslaught ensue?" And, Well, Abdullah killed him. I don't even think this match lasted 20 seconds. He dropped an elbow on him, took him out to the floor, and beat him over the head with a metal can. Don't ask me where the hell he got this metal can from. I have no clue. And then with about 15 seconds of remaining airtime, we hear Gary Hart vow more doom and destruction in the NWA, while Abdullah's leaned over the podium and eating David Crockett's format again. You know, David really should have kept that paperwork better contained. I mean, he knows Abby likes to eat paper. Just take an extra few minutes to bind the shit, dude. Once again, I ain't lying about any of that. That all happened. So, I mean, there were a handful of ups and downs this week. The matches mostly sucked, but it's par for the course with a lot of studio programs. And to be fair, last week Flair wrestled, so the action kind of stood out a little more. Overall, though, they were at least trying to get things in order for Starrcade. But again, we're like still in this really awkward phase where nothing's been officially announced or booked on paper. It's just guys teasing programs with other guys that may or may not come to pass. Some of them did, others didn't. I mean, they only now just told us that Starrcade isn't happening until December this year. So that must have been something they finalized in the last few days. And we talked about it earlier. Technically, they're no longer under the operation of Jim Crockett. Now that the sale is finalized, it's still the NWA to an extent. But this is a weird pre-Jim Herd era between now and early to mid-'89. Like, eventually Jim Crockett takes the book as an intern. They get George Scott in there to fuck things up. God, what a complete disaster that was. Dark times are ahead, people. I mean, we're only seeing the precursor to all of it. If you enjoy train wrecks, there's a lot of glorious content to look forward to in 1989. Some good stuff too, but a lot of bad management. All right. So we're going Boydless this week on Midsouth. Where did he say he was traveling to last week? Nebraska? Wyoming? Basically trying to avoid the cold front. Apparently they came into the area that week. So that meant JR was filling in as the main play-by-play guy. Not the worst possible substitution, I guess. I'm kidding. JR's great. You know who wasn't great, however, was Buddy Nichols, the sports director for the local TV network. You know, they brought this guy on several times to fill in as a commentator. Every single time he's made an appearance, God, I was actively begging for somebody to get the hook. I mean, nothing against the guy. I'm sure he was a nice dude, but completely unqualified to be on local television as a play-by-play commentator. And especially with JR having to essentially carry the whole show by himself this week on the headset. Like, he really needed a guy like Bill Watts to bounce off of. You know, someone to interact with throughout the show. Because even JR was relatively new to the whole play-by-play position by this point. He'd done color previously, but that was with having guys like Watts and even Boyd there to fill in as needed. I mean, this fucking Buddy Nichols gave him nothing to work with this week. a complete anti-charisma vacuum. I mean, at one point, he actually ended up turning into a modern-day Tony Schiavone. Half his dialogue throughout the show was, "Oh, this is great," or, "Oh, looks like it's going to be a great card ahead of us, JR." JR, you could tell, was like, "Oh, fuck. This guy's got nothing to offer. I may as well be talking to a brick wall." So with that all said, let's dive in and see what action they gave us on Midsouth television this week. We opened with Hacksaw, Butch Reed, and Jim Neidhart taking on George Weingroff and Tony Torres. Maybe it was just me. Maybe it was the lighting. Was Neidhart always that fucking pale? Good God, he looked whiter than Rick Knox. I mean, I know he's a heel. He's not supposed to look clean. But good Lord, dude. Hit a tanning bed at least once a month. That's about all I got in terms of banter for this match. Simple little enhancement to get the heels over. The finish was awesome. With Neidhart holding Weingroff in a front face lock. And just because Reed's a dick, he tries to goad Torres into stepping into the ring illegally. So as Johnny Martinez is trying to hold him back, Reed takes a cheap shot at Weingroff, who, mind you, is completely defenseless in a front face lock from a guy that outweighs him by 60 pounds. Then Neidhart just picks him up and gives him that fireman's carry slam for the 3. That's my favorite thing I see bad guys do in wrestling. Cheating despite the fact that they have a clear-cut advantage and have no reason to cheat. But they're going to do it anyway because fuck it, we're evil. Love that stuff. So then we come back for a Nikolai Volkov handicap squash with Mike Jackson and Randy Barber. These poor fuckers. They tried. They tried with everything they had to get the big Russian off his feet. Try as they might. The strategy was too faint. The Moscow Bear ended up being too much power for these American weaklings. They did actually get Nikolai down momentarily when they were just both throwing soup bones at him and, quite frankly, doing what any rational-minded person would do when you're up against 300-plus pounds of human mass. Just start throwing fists and hope to God it lands somewhere. So, yeah, these men were killed. Nikolai stacked them up like plywood and pinned them in about 90 seconds. I think the Russian national anthem lasted longer than the match itself. Oh yes, and I still maintain, Mike Jackson is the most undervalued wrestler of the 80s. And that led us to a little bit of enriching patriotism, considering where the United States was at this point with foreign affairs and just everything that was happening on a global scale at that time. It was not the best period to live in. That is for certain. So they put together a nice little VTR feature for Hacksaw Duggan, a guy who we really haven't seen featured much on television in the last several weeks. I mean, he's been around, but he's definitely taken a back seat in terms of his pecking order on the card. But they spliced in some Duggan footage from stuff we've seen over the last 6 or so months. I mean, a lot of that highlighted footage dated back to when he broke away from the Rat Pack and was going after General Skandar Akbar. They hear that epic shot where he's in the ring ripping off the General's clothes while the Black Ninja's foot is caught in the ropes. And fucking Alfred Neely's there trying to use every muscle in his body to open the rope so he can free the Black Ninja. They said that Charlie Daniels was the feature of the video package, so I mean, this is obviously dub music. I don't know much country music in the 80s where guys were playing in 7/8 time signatures. Although this did slap. They probably played The Devil Went Down to Georgia or something mainstream that the people would recognize. You gotta love the WWE Network. But it was a fun clip segment. Kind of brought me back to those conversations we were having in February and March of this year when Duggan was like one of the focal parts of the show every week. The Rat Pack breakup is probably still the best overall storyline of Midsouth in '83. I mean, there have been a couple other good ones. Mr. Wrestling 2 being stalked by Mr. Olympia and having his personal gear destroyed. But in terms of longevity and something they've actually built up to for months and months, can't get much better than the Duggan DiBiase feud. Top notch. So for our featured TV match this week, they actually advertised this the other week when they put together that pre-tape for Magnum and Mr. Wrestling 2. It's our first look at the new combination of Magnum and 2 as a tag team in Mid-South. Something that 2 was actively looking to seek out when he returned to the area. And again, just to kind of recap what happened the other week, Wrestling 2 wanted to join up and serve as a coach for Magnum TA. Saw a lot of potential in him. Wanted to share his insight and work with Magnum to teach him everything he knows. So they had basically a warm-up or tune-up match, I guess you could call it. They wrestled Jeff Sword and Doug Vines. I mean, I love everything about this Magnum Wrestling 2 pairing because if you really think about it contextually, up to this point, we never really saw this kind of combination when it comes to tag partners in wrestling. The younger, greener rookie being paired with the elder ring veteran with years of experience. I mean, most established tag teams by this period were guys that either spent years working together around the country or guys typically of the same age range and ring style. This was more of a newfound concept for the time. You know, and the fact that they're leaning into that as part of the overall story is what makes it so awesome. Because you watch these two together, yeah, they're mostly a well-oiled machine in terms of double team spots or frequent tagging. But even when you watch them and see a couple discrepancies or flashes where Magnum might be out of place for something, you can buy that these two are still kind of hashing out their mistiming and miscalled spots, trying to find their chemistry, so to speak. But they're both pretty much in there 50-50. No one's trying to hog the spotlight or do all the work. You know, they really didn't play much into the extended heat section where one of the babyfaces had a chance to make a comeback or anything. I mean, yeah, the job guys got to work over Magnum for like all of 3 seconds, but Magnum and 2 are pretty much in control the whole time. Plus, when you have JR talking about all this on commentary and trying to get over the significance of the new team, once he starts getting into those conversations about what if these guys were to someday give Reed and Neidhart a run for their money? Perhaps they want to pursue the Mid-South tag titles at some point. Again, you can see where they're trying to plant the seeds for their future down the road. So yeah, excellent stuff. Match wasn't a blow-away or anything, but it accomplished what it needed to. Crowd went nuts for the finish when 2 did the shoot-off to Vines, and then Magnum caught him with a belly-to-belly for the pin. And while they definitely celebrated like they won the Gold Cup, I mean, it was more of a consolation prize, knowing that they just won their first match together as a team. So it's like, hey, this might actually have potential. Now they can move up the ladder to stronger competition. So then we had Larry Higgins and Art Cruz, which kind of was what it was. I mean, anytime you hear me refer to something as a standby, you automatically assume I'm going to dismiss it. I mean, a lot of the time, yes. Wrestling here is fine, but there's only so much you can say about a cold match with 2 underneath guys that the people have no reason to give a crap about. They worked hard, tried to get the crowd into it, but nah. Higgins countered a roll-through attempt from Cruz, dropped an elbow on him to get the pin. That took us to Lanny Poffo versus John King. This made me laugh. I always love it when I see super athletic wrestlers try to grapple or work with job guys with 2 left feet, or barely have any athletic skill to begin with. Lanny's in there just trying to do his shit. John King has absolutely no clue how to feed for any of his offense. And on the one hand, I guess you can kind of blame Lanny Poffo for not being conscious. But, like, this is a complete clash of ring styles. Like, Lanny's in there doing mad wrestling and head scissors takeovers at various points. All these crazy athletic moves. John King had punches. That's literally all he could do. He just balled up his fist and tried to throw a punch. Then he'd throw another punch. He'd get Lanny in the corner for a moment. Then he'd throw another punch. I think Lanny eventually got fed up with him and just said, fuck this. I'm just going to do my stuff. If he dies, he dies. So he catches King over the ropes. I think he was trying to go for that hangman's move where he drapes the guy throat first over the ropes and then he goes out to the floor and lands on his feet. King had no idea what he was trying to do here. So Lanny just draped him throat first, jumped over the apron and hit him with a splash for the 3 count. Complete mess. But it was still fun. I didn't even think he was going to tempt fate trying to give this guy a moonsault. He was probably like, let's just get out of this while we still can. And that brought us to Crusher Darso and Paul Garner. This is 1 week removed from Darso losing to Volkov on television. So they gave him a little bit of a redemption match to get his momentum back. Really nothing to note about it, though. Paul Garner sucks. Darso beat him with an overhead backbreaker in like 2 minutes. And they still had about 5 minutes of airtime at the end, so they played some random footage from the Sam Houston Coliseum with Dr. Death wrestling Bobby Duncombe Sr. It's another name we really haven't seen around the area too frequently. Dr. Death, Steve Williams. Now, obviously this is still at the point where he was bouncing back and forth between pro football and wrestling. I think this was technically his very last season playing pro ball. So we actually will be seeing him in Midsouth on a full-time basis going forward once he wraps up seasons there. Or the season, I guess I should say. You can tell how well-versed I am in my sports talk. But, I mean, that was pretty much the show. You could tell they tried to simplify a lot of the program, considering Watts and Pierce weren't there. But that's not to discredit JR. I thought he did very well. And again, Buddy Nichols was there. Didn't necessarily harm the show, but didn't really add much value either. Not really a show you need to go out of your way to seek out if you're wondering if there's anything worth checking out. Any major highlights. The Wrestling 2 Magnum match was a lot of fun. I believe we are eventually coming up in the debut of the Midnight Express in Mid-South. I know they're eventually in the territory as of December of 83, but I can never remember if they actually debuted in early December or if it was late November. But it is something to keep on your radar. As we're closing in on 1984, what I still deem the peak years of Mid-South television. So, apparently somebody decided they're going to do their laundry now. Can anybody hear that in the background? Sounds like they're shooting off fireworks. I think that's a dryer. Well, before I get into World Class for this week, can I just say up front, I fucking hate these new Slim Jim commercials on Peacock. They just fill me with absolute rage having to watch the bad acting. God bless Bianca and LA Knight, but yeah, they're not the Macho Man. You can't have Slim Jim sponsors without the original. And you certainly can't have Slim Jim commercials with cable access level actors. Have the standards really fallen that low? All right, so I got that off my chest. Fuck Slim Jim. That's the overall message there. It's a garbage snack. So I just kind of went into the show this week with stream of consciousness note-taking. I legitimately just sat down and pressed play. Didn't try to organize my notes in the show. I just said, let's go. So my apologies if things seem a little out of sorts with anything I mentioned about this week's program. For example, Johnny Mantel's ring robe looking like silky lingerie out of a Playboy magazine. And in fact, that was the very first thing I wrote down about this week's program. Johnny Mantel in lingerie. Hide the children. I'm actually skimming down a bit here. Did I write down who his opponent was? I know it wasn't anybody important. Yeah. Well, I wrote Montana several times, so I presume it was Tommy Montana. So, like I said, nobody important. Now, technically, this is the week of Thanksgiving, so they were in the process of getting ready to tape the Reunion Arena Star Wars show. I always hesitate to call these Sportatorium episodes go-home shows because they're not really traditional go-home shows like we typically see with the modern era. And a lot of the time, there's not even really any pay-per-view hype going on, outside anything Mercer might mention on commentary. And right now, the big selling point for the Thanksgiving special is the Great Kabuki John Tatum Texas Death Cage match, where, if I heard correctly, did Bill Mercer say that Sunshine and Missy were going to be cornermen or corner women. Well, that doesn't sound ethical. Why the hell would you let the girls go out of ringside for that match? Talk about throwing the gals into the lion's den. Hey, yeah, I know it's in a cage, but it's a pretty brutal environment for girls to be around. Especially if something goes horribly awry, which evidently it will. Anyway, was there anything interesting in this match to mention? Johnny Mantell was in it, so that narrows the answer down to probably not. He went over. I remember that. Because of course he did. I did note the girl chasing him up the aisleway to sign an autograph afterwards. It was noticeable because she was the only female in the entire sportatorium that wanted an autograph. You think of all the guys, Carrie, Kevin, the Iceman, even Brian Diaz. Like, you'd expect girls to go right after them. But this girl said, I want Johnny Mantell's signature. Okay, lady. Whatever floats your boat. So then we had John Tatum accompanied by, quote, the great Southwest socialite Missy Hyatt. Mark Lawrence's words, not mine. And he wrestled Scott Casey with Sunshine in his corner. I'm surprised he didn't go with something like the debonair sweetheart of Dallas, Sunshine. He just called her the lovely Sunshine. And she was lovely. So, last week, Missy bought John Tatum a personalized Lincoln Mercury sports car as a sign of love, apparently. 1 week later, not only was she completely dismissive of Tatum when he was getting his ass kicked, she pretty much wanted nothing to do with him. Can someone explain to me how that's even possible? How do we go from Missy buying Tatum a car to a week later, she's lost the tingles for him? Oh, wait a minute, I know the answer. She's a woman. Of course. How silly of me. Stupid question. Maybe they had a rough night in bed. Who knows? So that wound up being the central story of the match. Missy was down on the floor with her arms crossed, barely even making eye contact with Tatum. So as the match progresses and Tatum has things in his control, we see Missy hit the ring apron to cause a distraction so Tatum can dump Casey over the top rope. And while Missy and Rick Hazard are jaw-jacking back and forth, you see Casey start to climb back into the ring. And as Tatum goes to lift Casey back into the ring, Sunshine comes up and pokes Tatum in the eye, which allows for Casey to come back in and roll up Tatum for the 3 count. So in an effort to distract Hazard for no discernible reason, while John Tatum was fully in control of the match, she wound up costing him the match anyway for being a ditzy blonde and not paying attention to Sunshine in the other side. Deliberate planning or stupid emotionalism? You go figure that one out. We also had another quick catfight sequence with the girls afterwards, where after they get separated, Sunshine gets on the house mic and vows to rip Missy's eyes out. Bet you Missy's regretting being a sourpuss in front of John Tatum now, huh? It is kind of an interesting plot twist. I think the problem was that, again, this comes a week after we just saw Missy and John at a car dealership being all lovey-dovey. So, unless I missed something in the tapings, what the hell happened between last week and this week that set her off? Hormones? Her cycle? Something that happened off camera that we don't know about? The fact that it's John Tatum and nobody gives a fuck about him? Now, I'm partially speaking on my behalf with that last point. On the other hand, I am looking forward to seeing Sunshine rip some eyeballs out. I mean, she's already going to be at a ringside for a bloodbath Texas death match. May as well go for broke. Then we had the Grappler versus Brian Adias. I believe this is non-title, since Adias is still technically the Texas Heavyweight Champion. They didn't really do a great job establishing that in the ring intros. Fuck, this match was boring. So boring, dude. I told you my notes are all over the place for this episode. Here's practically everything I wrote down about the body of this match, right up until the finishing sequence where I decided to take a few more notes. 4 bullet points. Brian Adias versus Grappler. Adias holds Grappler in a stationary arm wringer for 10 minutes. Heat on Adias for an hour, with more boring headlocks and holds. I'm falling asleep at the wheel trying to watch this. I'm not even trying to be facetious. This was a complete, nothing happening, boring TV match that went 8 times longer than it needed to. I mean, they barely kicked it into a second gear during Adias' comeback. Got a little better once they started doing some spots, and imagine that, not laying on the mat, taking a nap for 45 minutes. And it's going relatively okay in the last minute or so, until we get this baffling finish that I could not figure out for the life of me. So, they established the story that Jack Victory wants another shot at Diaz for the Texas Heavyweight title. He's mad about the results of the Cotton Bowl event when he lost to Diaz. Presumably those two are going to have a rematch for the belt at some point. Probably as soon as the Thanksgiving Star Wars special. Why the fuck did you beat Brian Adias clean here? Clean! That's the most bewildering part. Adias gets cut off attempting a splash off the middle rope. The grappler recovers Adias. I'm expecting some kind of near fall. No. Bronco counts 1, 2, 3. And I'm like, okay, did I miss some loaded gimmick in the knee pad? No, I'm serious. This baffled me to the point where I actually thought I missed a key spot in the match, where the heel loaded up his knee pad with a gimmick to cheat. That's not what happened. The grappler pinned Diaz because he countered a splash attempt and put his knees up to protect himself. And I guess Diaz got the wind knocked out of him. Now, again, it would be one thing if the championship match for the Thanksgiving Star Wars special is going to be the Grappler versus Brian Diaz. Bearing in mind Jack Victory is still part of the equation. How is this supposed to get me excited to see those two square off in a rematch? By beating Diaz on TV the week before he's supposed to defend the belt against Jack Victory? Who's booking this shit, Russo? Again, I have to assume Grappler's getting a title shot soon, right? I don't see how he wouldn't. Unless he just doesn't give a crap about the Texas Heavyweight title. And you know, in that sense, I really can't blame him. So after that questionable booking blunder, they showed a pre-tape of an angle they shot at Reunion Arena recently. It is Kevin Von Erich trying to do an interview and mention some things about the six-man tag team championship. Talked about the rise of Lance Von Erich a little bit. And while he's in the middle of his promo, Chris Adams interrupts him and keeps trying to interject while Kevin's talking. And so eventually things get heated between the two to where Kevin keeps telling him to shut up and wait his turn. I guess Chris was supposed to get an interview as well. So to the shock of absolutely nobody, they get into a brawl, which, surprise, surprise, leads to a run-in attempt from Gino Hernandez to create a 2-on-1 disadvantage. And because Kevin was mentioning Lance here, well, you could clearly see what they were trying to set up. Indeed, here comes Lance to the rescue. And this was really our first time seeing Lance getting physical in a big angle for television. He was effective in what he was supposed to do, helping Kevin to run off the bad guys. And we even saw Kevin rip off Chris's mask and give the Fort Worth fans a little bit of head exposure. Although they were smart enough to keep the cameras off of him as much as possible, so we, the viewing audience at home, couldn't really see him. But the crowd got a good glimpse. In terms of Lance, he really didn't land any of those punches at all. It wasn't bad, but I think I'm slowly starting to gather why a lot of people are highly critical of Lance's work in World Class. I think that people were willing to go along with it at first, but you can even tell there's a good chunk of that audience that just sees right through it. They know Lance isn't a member of the Von Erich family. They're trying to suspend disbelief, but it really insults their intelligence. And you can only fool the people for so long until they start to either protest or just become ambivalent about the whole thing. And unfortunately, it's going to rub off wrong on Kevin and Kerry just by being affiliated with it. When poor Mike comes back, him too. And he's already been through a rough patch this year. Like I said, it's a quick little angle to give Lance some TV time. It wasn't a horrible brawl, but it just didn't come across like a Von Erich segment should, The people were way more into seeing Chris's mask removed than they were anything Lance did. Hell, the people popped more for Kerry removing his ring robe in the main event than they did anything Lance did in that previous brawl. Oh, side note here. It's always funny when you watch the girls surround the ring for autographs. They're all going batshit and waving around notepads and magazines and literally anything they can get their hands on for a simple autograph. They look like absolute whack jobs. But God, they are so play when that bell's about the ring. They just casually all walk back to their seats like a recess dismissal. No one tries to hit the ring or come back for seconds. No, they're super tolerant. They're just like, all right, Kerry, go do your match and we'll bother you afterwards. So, well, last week, we were supposed to get Kerry Von Erich versus the One Man Gang, which ended up turning into a no contest when Rick Hazard couldn't get either man to comply with the rules. So he just threw the match out. This week they said, fuck it, let's try it again. And we'll pray for a clean finish. You know, while they had virtually the same style match here, a lot of floor brawling and not really keeping things within the confines of the wrestling ring throughout, Hazard was able to control the pace of the match a little better this week. Even though, again, we did not get a decisive finish here. There was a point where Gang got posted on the floor. Kerry tried to work over his arm. I mean, most of it was a back and forth big man hoss fight. It ends up leading to the spot where Gang threw Rick Hazard in harm's way to eat a punch from Kerry. Unintentional punch, of course. But Gang throwing him in the middle of it was deliberate. So as Hazard's laid out unconscious, both guys are throwing haymakers. We get a great spot where Gang gets tied up in the ropes and his feet are dangling outside. So while he's swinging back and forth on the ropes like a teeter-totter, Kerry just drops a knee over his head and then flattens Gang like a pancake. There was some inadvertent comedy in this match. And, well, then Hazard just gets up and signals for the bell. This time calling it a DQ because he knew Gang intentionally grabbed him and threw him in the line of fire. So Kerry wins on a technicality. And then we had another post-match fight where Gang's trying to throw chairs into the ring, but Kerry's standing his ground. And you could see they're obviously trying to set up some kind of stipulation match later on. I don't think they're going to book anything as soon as the Thanksgiving Star Wars special, but possibly the Christmas one. Although it is important to remember, too, I said last week we were supposed to get Kerry versus Gang. That was actually a replacement match. Originally, they were supposed to do the one-man Gang and Bruiser Brody. That was the original match on paper. But then Brody couldn't make the show because of a flight cancellation or something. So they might have other plans in store for Gang later on. And maybe the Kerry thing was just an interim program until they figured out Brody's status. Because then again, Kerry's still heavily involved with the Gino Chris stuff. It'd be kind of weird to separate him from all that and put him in this feud with Gang unless they know for a fact Brody wasn't going to be around before the end of the year. We'll see, though. Everybody's schedules are so weird. But yeah, this show is mostly skippable. Fuck me, dude. That Brian and Diaz match was like 1984 levels of boredom at times. Me watching the Missing Link and Killer Khan work terrible 15-minute main events with a Von Erichs level bad. Telling you, dude, this entire show right now is primarily being carried by two things. You have Percy Pringle and Rick Rude, Chris and Gino. I know they got some other names they brought in recently, but there's a reason World Class really fell off the rails following the Freebirds' departure. You think we go from the Freebirds and the Von Erichs? Now in 1985, I'm watching Scott Casey and Brian Diaz and John Tatum and just the more local Dallas names that don't really resonate all that much. They're not bad workers. It's just a star power dilemma, dude. They're not high-profile big names that stand the test of time. They're not the kind of people you want to throw on the cover posters to sell tickets. And like even the Von Erichs have sort of fallen off the pedestal in the last several months. I mean, their stuff with Gino and Chris has been great, don't get me wrong. But it's nowhere near the level of heat they had with the Freebirds. And the fact that they're going to loop Lance into all this eventually, oh, God. And we all know 86 is not a good year for World Class either. And we're seeing the early signs toward the end of the year. It is not looking too promising for the new year. They still got the fans. They still got the passionate people showing up to buy tickets, but company morale is about to go right down the drain. And it all starts with that NWA withdrawal. But we'll keep covering more of those stories in the future months. So as we wrap up this one, as always, I want to thank everybody for stopping in to check out the Friday show, and looks like Monday we'll be back to just classic retro Raw. The following week is the WWE Survivor Series special, so I might do a card preview to see what we're in store for. But that'll do it for now. Take care, everybody. Peace out.